You would never believe this love story. It's amazing. This story interests you? Subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's begin. Robert Oliver had always been considered a successful man. At 45, he held the position of executive director of a multinational pharmaceutical company in New York City, lived in a luxury apartment on the Upper East Side, and could afford the privilege of dining at the city's best restaurants. His wardrobe consisted of impeccably tailored suits, his schedule filled with important meetings and international travel. Efficiency was his middle name. But behind that flawless facade, a growing emptiness consumed him daily. On that Thursday morning, Robert looked out the panoramic window of his office at the grey city stretching as far as the eye could see. The cloudy sky seemed to reflect his mood. He had been summoned to an extraordinary meeting with the board of directors. The acquisition of the company by a European group was imminent, and everyone knew what that meant. "Mr. Stevenson would like to see you now, Mary," his secretary announced, interrupting his thoughts. Robert adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and headed to the meeting room. The solemn expressions around the oval table already anticipated what was to come. Gerald Stevenson, an Englishman with a rigid posture and a calculated smile, was direct when it came to business. "Robert, you have been a valuable asset to this company for years," Stevenson began in his heavily accented English. "But with the new organizational structure, many positions will need to be redefined." The following words sounded like white noise. Severance package, confidentiality agreement, substantial compensation. Robert merely nodded, his face a mask of professionalism that hid a strange sensation that was neither sadness nor anger, but liberation. 3 hours later, Robert left the glass and steel building with a folder containing his termination documents and a check with 6 zeros. 20 years of dedication summarized in a black folder. He felt no revolt, only a disconcerting relief. Upon arriving home, he observed the apartment that looked more like a decor showroom than a home. There were no family photos, only works of art chosen by an interior designer. There were no signs of life, only expensive and impersonal objects. He sat on the Italian design sofa, and for the first time in years allowed himself to sit in silence, doing absolutely nothing. No calls to answer, no emails to respond to, no strategies to devise. The silence was deafening. It was then that the memory surfaced, faint as a morning mist. A weekend trip years ago to a small historic town in Vermont. Willow Creek, cobblestone streets, a square with an imposing Baroque church. The aroma of fresh coffee mixed with that of freshly baked cheese puffs, and a sense of peace he had forgotten existed. Without much thought, he picked up the phone. "Mary, I need you to cancel all my appointments for the next few months." "But sir, what about the transition with the new director and the shareholders' meeting?" "All that is no longer my concern," he replied with a calm that surprised even himself. "Tell everyone I'm leaving. No contact number, no address. Understood?" The next morning, with only a suitcase containing the essentials, Robert set off for Willow Creek. He didn't tell anyone, not even his ex-wife, with whom he maintained a cordial but distant relationship since their divorce 6 years ago. His parents had passed away long ago and he had no siblings. He realized with a pang of melancholy that there was no one in his life he would truly miss or who would miss him. The drive took longer than expected. When he finally arrived in Willow Creek, the sun was beginning to set, bathing the colonial buildings in a golden light that seemed straight out of a painting. Robert parked in the main square and got out of the car, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs. The town was exactly as he remembered, perhaps even more beautiful, with its colorful houses, artisan shops, and historic churches. Without a hotel reservation, he began to walk through the narrow streets, observing the "for rent" signs in the windows. After a few frustrating attempts at crowded inns, he spotted a small 2-story building with a discreet sign, "The Berry Blossom Cafe, rooms for rent." The place was at the end of a quiet street, away from the tourist center, but still a short walk from the main square. The cafe on the ground floor was almost empty at that hour. A bell tinkled when Robert opened the door. The atmosphere was cozy, with solid wood tables, shelves full of books, and the unmistakable aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Behind the counter, a woman of approximately 40 years old organized cups. She had brown hair tied in an unpretentious bun, and wore a navy blue apron over a simple white blouse. "Good evening," Robert said, approaching the counter. "I saw the sign about rooms for rent." The woman looked up, revealing a penetrating and lively gaze. For a moment she seemed to assess Robert with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "We have a room available upstairs," she replied, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Actually, it's more of a small apartment. It has a bedroom, bathroom, and a living room with a kitchenette. But I'll warn you right away, it's nothing luxurious." "Sounds perfect," Robert said. "I'm looking for something simple." A brief smile passed over the woman's lips, as if she had detected something ironic in that statement, coming from a man who, even casually dressed, exuded sophistication. "I'm Claire Meadows," she introduced herself, extending her hand, "owner of this cafe and the property." "Robert Oliver," he replied, feeling the firmness of her handshake. "I've just arrived in town and plan to stay for a while. Maybe a few weeks, maybe longer." "Well, Mr. Oliver, the rent is weekly," Claire explained. "If you want to see the place before deciding—" "It's not necessary," he interrupted. "I trust your word about its simplicity." This time Claire's smile was more open, revealing a small dimple on her left cheek. "Then let's sort out the details and get your bags. By the way, the cafe opens at 7 in the morning and closes at 8 at night. On weekends, we close at 9. If you need anything during the night, there's a doorbell next to the back door." As they climbed the side staircase leading to the upper floor, Robert noticed that the wooden steps creaked softly. The sound, far from annoying, had something cozy about it, as if the house were alive, breathing along with its occupants. The apartment was, in fact, modest. A small but well-lit living room with a two-seater sofa, a round table by the window, and a basic kitchenette. The bedroom had just enough space for a double bed and an old wardrobe. But the large window compensated for the lack of space, offering a view of the backyard, where a berry blossom tree laden with fruit stood out. "It's perfect," Robert said, surprised by his own sincerity. "The bathroom is there," Claire indicated, pointing to a door on the left. "Hot water works fine, but don't take too long in the shower." "Old building, old pipes." "Understood." "Oh, and one last thing," she added, seeming slightly hesitant. "Sometimes during the night, you might hear some sounds coming from downstairs. It's my niece, Laura. She likes to dance after the cafe closes. I hope it doesn't bother you." "Not at all," Robert assured her. "I've never been very sensitive to noise." Claire nodded, seeming relieved. "Well, then it's settled. Welcome to the Berry Blossom Cafe, Mr. Oliver. Just Robert, please. Just Claire." "Then," she replied with a small smile before withdrawing. Alone in the apartment, Robert opened his suitcase and began to put his few clothes in the old wardrobe. He felt strangely light, as if he had left behind in New York City not only his position and material possessions, but also an invisible burden he had carried for years. He opened the window and let the night breeze in, bringing with it the sounds and smells of the small town. Outside, crickets chirped, and in the distance, voices and laughter could be heard coming from the square. For a moment, Robert wondered if he wasn't making a mistake, if he shouldn't be in New York organizing his next career, leveraging his contacts to secure another executive position. But then he remembered the feeling of emptiness that accompanied him even in moments of greatest professional success. No, he needed this time, this space. He needed to rediscover who he was beyond the meetings, reports, and corporate decisions. With that thought, he lay down on the bed and for the first time in years, fell asleep without needing medication to control insomnia. He was awakened the next morning by the singing of birds and the aroma of fresh coffee rising from downstairs. For a moment, he was disoriented, accustomed to the blaring alarm clock and the urban view from his New York apartment. Then he remembered where he was, and an involuntary smile appeared on his lips. He dressed calmly, opting for a simple shirt and jeans, clothes he rarely wore in his previous life. He went downstairs and found the cafe already in full swing, with some tables occupied by locals having breakfast before starting their day. Claire was behind the counter, serving coffee in colorful cups. Seeing him, she gave a nod of recognition. "Good morning, Robert. Did you sleep well?" "Better than in years," he admitted, sitting on a stool by the counter. "What do you recommend for breakfast?" "Our cheese puffs are famous in town," she replied proudly. "And the cornbread cake just came out of the oven." "Sounds great. And a coffee, please. Black, no sugar." While waiting, Robert discreetly Observe the environment. The cafe had an unpretentious charm, with its exposed stone walls and wooden beams on the ceiling. On the walls, paintings of local landscapes and black and white photographs of the town in olden times. A grey cat slept comfortably in an armchair in the corner, seemingly oblivious to the movement around it. Claire placed a steaming cup of coffee and a plate with golden cheese puffs and a generous slice of cornbread cake in front of him. "Thank you," he said, inhaling the aroma of the coffee. "Has this place been yours for a long time?" "5 years," she replied, wiping the counter with a cloth. "Before that it was my mother's, and before that, my grandmother's. I practically grew up among these tables." "It's a special place," Robert commented, biting into a cheese puff that melted in his mouth. This is really delicious." A smile of satisfaction lit up Claire's face. "Family recipe. The dough is prepared in the early morning to be just right by breakfast." It was then that Robert noticed movement at the back door. A girl of approximately 7 years old entered the cafe. She had curly brown hair tied in 2 braids and large, expressive eyes. She wore a simple yellow dress and carried a colorful backpack on her back. Seeing Claire, she waved energetically and approached the counter. Claire smiled at the girl and made some gestures with her hands, which Robert recognized as ASL. The girl responded with quick, animated gestures, her face lighting up as she spoke with her hands. "This is Laura, my niece," Claire introduced, turning to Robert. "Laura, this is Mr. Oliver, our new tenant." The girl looked at Robert with curiosity and made a greeting gesture. Robert, not knowing how to respond appropriately, merely smiled and waved back. "Laura has been deaf since birth," Claire explained in a low voice, "but that has never stopped her from communicating. In fact, sometimes I think she expresses herself better than many people I know." "Nice to meet you, Laura," Robert said, maintaining his smile. He noticed that despite not being able to hear, the girl watched his lips intently, as if trying to read what he was saying. Claire translated his words into signs and Laura smiled, making a new gesture that seemed friendly. "She said you have kind eyes," Claire translated, seeming slightly surprised. Laura is usually good at judging people at first sight. Robert felt strangely touched by that innocent observation. "Tell her I think her eyes are very clever." After Claire translated, Laura smiled even more and made a quick gesture before heading to a table in the corner, where she opened her backpack and took out a notebook. "She's going to do some homework before going to school," Claire explained. "The school bus passes at 8:30 to pick her up." "You speak ASL very well," Robert commented, impressed. "I had to learn," she replied simply. "When my sister Sophia, when she passed away, Laura came to live with me. She was only 4. We learned together, actually. Me, sign language, her how to live without her mother." There was an underlying sadness in Claire's words, but also a quiet strength that Robert immediately admired. He thought about saying something comforting, but felt that any comment would be superficial in the face of the depth of that story. Instead, he merely nodded in understanding and finished his breakfast in silence, occasionally observing the girl concentrating on her studies. There was something special about that cafe, that determined woman and that child who, despite the silence surrounding her, seemed to radiate light. After breakfast, Robert went out to explore the town. He walked unhurriedly through the cobblestone streets, admiring the colonial architecture, the Baroque churches and the artisan shops. On every corner, he was greeted with friendly smiles and nods by the locals. The Vermont hospitality, famous throughout the region, proved true in every interaction. He had lunch at a small family restaurant, where he tried cowboy beans that reminded him of the homemade meals his grandmother used to prepare when he was a child. In the afternoon, he visited St. Anthony's Parish Church, marveling at the richness of detail of the gilded altars and sacred paintings. As the sun began to set, Robert sat on a bench in the main square and watched the sky change from blue to orange and finally to a deep shade of purple. The first stars began to appear, brighter than he had ever noticed in New York City, where light pollution obscured much of the night sky. It was then that he noticed something strange. He hadn't checked his cell phone once all day. In his previous life, he checked messages and emails obsessively every few minutes, always fearing missing some crucial information or business opportunity. Now the phone remained forgotten in his pocket, its presence almost irrelevant. When he returned to the Berry Blossom Cafe, the establishment was closing, Claire was saying goodbye to the last customers with warm smiles. Seeing him, she waved him in. "How was your day?" she asked, collecting cups from the tables. "Surprisingly relaxing," Robert replied sincerely. "This town has something special." "It's the pace," Claire said, stacking the dishes. "New York City must be 100 times faster. Here people still have time to watch the clouds or chat on the sidewalk without rushing." "Can I help?" Robert offered, indicating the dishes. Claire hesitated for a moment, seeming surprised by the offer. "It's not necessary. You're a guest." "I insist," he said, already beginning to collect glasses. "My hands still work perfectly well, despite being accustomed only to keyboards and papers in recent years." With a resigned shrug, Claire accepted the help. They worked in silence for a few minutes, she washing the dishes and he drying them with a clean cloth. There was something comforting in that simple activity, a kind of active meditation that Robert hadn't experienced in a long time. "Is Laura asleep yet?" he asked after a while. "Not yet," Claire replied, looking at the clock. "She must be in the back room practicing her dance." "It's what she always does before bed? Dance? You mentioned that yesterday." "Yes, she loves to dance," Claire explained with an affectionate smile. "Even though she can't hear the music, she feels the vibrations through the wooden floor. I turn the sound up a little louder, and she follows the rhythm with her feet. It's something you have to see to understand." As if in response to her words, they began to hear soft rhythmic thumps coming from a room at the back of the cafe. They were light but defined steps, following a beat that only Laura seemed to hear. "Come," Claire invited, drying her hands. "If you don't mind, I'd like to properly introduce you to Laura. She seems to have taken to you, and that doesn't happen with everyone." Robert followed her to a side door that led to a small space that seemed to have originally been a pantry, but was now empty except for an old stereo in a corner and a large mirror on the wall. The floor was polished wood worn by constant use. In the center of the room, Laura danced. It was not a childish or clumsy dance, but graceful and coordinated movements that told a story without words. Her small body seemed to float to the rhythm of music that Robert could hear softly, a gentle, almost ethereal instrumental melody. The girl's eyes were closed, her face serene, completely absorbed in the moment. It was then that Robert understood. For Laura, dance was not just a hobby but a language, as vital as ASL. It was her way of connecting with a world she could not hear, of expressing feelings that perhaps words, even signed ones, could not fully capture. When she finally opened her eyes and saw the two of them watching, she did not seem embarrassed. On the contrary, her face lit up with a smile and she made an inviting gesture to Claire, who responded with a nod. To Robert's surprise, Claire entered the space and began to dance with Laura. It was not a rehearsed choreography, but a silent conversation between aunt and niece, an exchange of gestures and movements that transcended words. There was an intimacy there, a deep connection that Robert observed with a mixture of admiration and a pang of envy. When was the last time he had connected so authentically with another human being? After a few minutes, Laura noticed Robert still standing at the door and made another inviting gesture, this time directed at him. "She wants you to join us," Claire translated, laughing at the panicked expression that crossed the man's face. "Me? No, I don't know how to dance," Robert protested, suddenly feeling uncomfortable. "I've never had a knack for it." Claire translated his words for Laura, who crossed her arms with a determined expression that made her look very much like her aunt. She then made a series of quick gestures. "She says everyone knows how to dance," Claire translated with an amused smile. "You just need to feel it, not think. And that you think too much." Robert couldn't help but laugh, surprised by the perceptive observation of a 7-year-old child. "She's right. I think too much." With a hesitation that did not match his usual confident demeanor, Robert took a few steps into the room. Laura immediately took his hand and pulled him to the center of the space. Not knowing what to do, Robert remained motionless, feeling ridiculously out of place. "Just follow what she does," Claire suggested gently. "You don't have to be perfect." Laura started with simple movements, swaying her arms and taking small steps to the sides. Robert tried to imitate her, initially feeling awkward and embarrassed. But little by little, under the girl's encouraging gaze, he began to relax. He wasn't dancing well, he knew that, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the moment, the connection, the simplicity of that act. When the music ended, Laura applauded enthusiastically, her face radiant. She made a few more quick gestures that Claire translated with a laugh. "She says you dance like a robot, but with practice you can get better." Robert laughed, surprised by his own reaction. At another point in his life, he would have been offended by such an assessment of his abilities, always so concerned with appearing competent in everything he did. Now he accepted the honest criticism of a child with humility and even gratitude. "Tell her I'll practice," he replied, still smiling. Later, after Laura had gone to bed and Claire had retired to her quarters at the back of the cafe, Robert went up to his apartment with a strange feeling in his chest. It was something he hadn't felt in a long time, perhaps since childhood, a mixture of simple contentment and quiet hope. As if somehow he had found a way back to something important he had lost long ago. He sat by the window, watching the stars and listening to the nocturnal sounds of the small town. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to think not about the past or the future, but only about the present, in the exact moment he was living, with all its imperfections and possibilities. He didn't know how long he would stay in Willow Creek, nor what he would do when he decided to move on. But for now that didn't matter. For now he was exactly where he needed to be. As he prepared for bed, he heard Laura's light footsteps downstairs again. This time, instead of ignoring them, he allowed himself to close his eyes and feel the rhythm, imagining the girl dancing under the stars, teaching him without words to rediscover the simplicity he had lost. And with that thought, Robert fell asleep, without realizing that a gentle smile remained on his lips as sleep took him. In the days that followed, Robert established a routine he had never imagined for himself. He woke early, had coffee downstairs, exchanged a few words with Claire and occasionally with Laura before the girl left for school. Afterward, he spent his mornings exploring the town and its surroundings, sometimes hiking for hours on trails leading to hidden waterfalls or small rural chapels. In the afternoons, he would often sit in the square with a book, a habit he had abandoned years ago, replaced by reports and spreadsheets. Or he would visit the studio of a local artisan, watching with fascination as skillful hands transformed simple materials into objects of beauty. Upon returning to the cafe in the late afternoon, he frequently helped Claire with small tasks, fixing a loose shelf, changing a burnt-out light bulb, organizing the stock. She initially protested this help, insisting he was a guest, not an employee. But Robert explained that he needed to feel useful, that idle hands bothered him. Eventually, she accepted his help with a silent thank you in her eyes. In the evenings, after the cafe closed, he often joined Claire and Laura for dinner in the small back kitchen. Laura had quickly grown fond of him and insisted on teaching him some basic ASL signs. Robert, to his own surprise, was a diligent student, practicing until he could communicate with the girl without Claire's constant mediation. It was during one of these dinners, almost 2 weeks after his arrival, that Robert noticed Claire was particularly quiet, her gaze distant as she toyed with the food on her plate without actually eating. "Something wrong?" he asked softly, while Laura was distracted drawing in her notebook after finishing her meal. Claire seemed to awaken from her thoughts, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's nothing, just some concerns about the cafe. Nothing important." Robert didn't press, respecting her privacy, but over the next few days he began to notice other signs that something was amiss. Letters Claire hastily put away when he approached, phone calls that left her tense, a constant worry that shadowed her gaze even when she smiled. One evening, while helping to close the cafe, Robert noticed an envelope on the counter. He didn't intend to snoop, but the name Mark Taylor printed in the upper corner caught his attention. It was letterhead, looking like an official document. "Excuse me," Claire said, appearing suddenly and collecting the envelope with slightly trembling hands. "I shouldn't have left that out. Is everything okay?" Robert asked, noticing her agitation. Claire hesitated, biting her lower lip as she did when she was nervous, a gesture Robert had learned to recognize in recent weeks. Finally, with a sigh, she gestured to a chair. "Perhaps it's better if I explain. You've been so kind to Laura and me. You deserve to know what's happening." They sat at a corner table, the cafe now empty and silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Laura had already retired for the night, and only a dim lamp illuminated the room. casting long shadows on the stone walls. "Mark Taylor is Laura's biological father," Claire began, her voice low and controlled but with an underlying tension. He abandoned my sister Sophia when she was 3 months pregnant. Disappeared completely, changed cities, blocked numbers. Sophia never heard from him again, not even when Laura was born with congenital deafness. Robert listened in silence, feeling a growing indignation on behalf of that strong woman and extraordinary child who had unknowingly become important to him. "When Sophia fell ill," Claire continued, her voice now softer, "she tried to locate him again, to ensure Laura would have a guardian if she couldn't recover. But she was unsuccessful. And when she left us, I naturally assumed guardianship of Laura. It's what Sophia wanted, and I wouldn't have been able to part with Laura anyway. She is everything to me." Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but her voice remained firm. Robert resisted the urge to take her hand to comfort her, feeling that the gesture might interrupt that moment of trust. 3 months ago, Claire continued after a pause, Mark reappeared, out of nowhere. He said he had changed his life, that he was remorseful, that he wanted to get to know his daughter. At first, he just asked to see her occasionally, but it soon became clear that he wanted more. He wanted custody of Laura, but how? Robert asked, unable to restrain himself. "After all these years of abandonment? He has money now," Claire explained with a bitter smile. "Apparently he became a successful businessman in Boston. He married the daughter of an influential politician and suddenly decided he wants to be a father. He hired expensive lawyers, is challenging my guardianship, claiming I am financially unstable, that I cannot offer Laura the opportunities he could." The injustice of it all made Robert's blood boil. In his corporate career, he had witnessed countless unfair maneuvers, power plays and betrayals, but nothing that had affected him personally like this story. "What does the document say?" he asked, indicating the envelope Claire still held. "It's a summons for a preliminary hearing next month. He's accelerating the process." Claire ran a hand through her hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability. "The problem is, he's not entirely wrong. I am financially unstable. The cafe barely covers expenses. Laura's specialized therapies are expensive. I had to cancel her dance classes last month because I couldn't afford them. His lawyers will use all of this against me." "And what does Laura want?" Robert asked. "Does she know about Mark?" "She knows he exists, but she's never met him personally. And she shows no interest. For her, her family has always been Sophia and me. After Sophia passed, I was all she knew as family." Claire laughed softly but without humor. "Do you know what's ironic? He doesn't even know ASL. How does he plan to communicate with his own daughter?" Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Robert contemplated everything he had just heard, feeling a growing resolve within himself. "I can help," he finally said. "I know good family law attorneys in New York. I can make some calls." Claire looked at him, surprise evident on her face. "Why? Why would you care so much?" The question caught him off guard. Why indeed did he care so much? He had known Claire and Laura for only 2 weeks. His life in New York, his career, his former world, all of it seemed increasingly distant, like a dream from which he had awakened. And this simpler, more authentic reality became more real, more meaningful each day. "Because you matter to me," he replied simply. "I don't know why or how it happened so quickly, but it's the truth. And if I can use my resources, my contacts to help, then I want to do it." Claire observed him for a long moment, as if searching for something in his gaze. Whatever she saw there seemed to convince her, for she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I don't want your charity, Robert. If you're going to help us, you need to let me repay you in some way." "It's not charity," he assured her. "Consider it an investment. In the cafe, perhaps. This place has potential you haven't fully explored yet." The ghost of a smile passed over Claire's lips. "Always the businessman, aren't you?" "Old habits," he admitted with a half-smile. "But this time, I want to use those skills for something that truly matters." The next morning, while having coffee, Robert used his cell phone for the first time in days to make a series of calls. The first was to Ferdinand Davis, one of the best family law attorneys he knew in New York. He briefly explained the situation, without mentioning it was a personal favor. He wasn't ready yet to explain the drastic change in his life. Then, he called his accountant to check the state of his finances. The severance package had been generous, and his investments over the years ensured him a comfortable situation even without working for quite some time. Finally, he made one last call to an architect colleague he had met on a corporate project years ago. While Robert discreetly conducted his business in a corner of the cafe, Claire watched him with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Part of her feared accepting help, especially from someone who had entered her life so recently. But another part, the part that saw the sparkle in Laura's eyes when she danced with Robert, that noticed how he strove to learn ASL, that felt the sincerity in his words, that part urged her to trust. A few days later, Robert surprised her with a more concrete proposal. "I've been thinking," he began during a lull in cafe activity. "This place has a lot of untapped potential. The location is excellent. The food is wonderful. The atmosphere is welcoming. But it could expand, modernize certain aspects, perhaps even offer more formal lodging like an inn." "All of that costs money I don't have," Claire reminded him, though there was a spark of interest in her eyes. "That's where I come in," Robert continued. "I propose a partnership. I invest in the cafe, help with the expansion and modernization. You maintain creative and operational control. After all, it's your place, your history. But we share the profits, and more importantly, you'll be in a much more stable financial position for any legal battle that comes your way." "Are you serious?" Claire asked, clearly surprised. "You barely know me. You barely know this business. Why would you invest your money here?" "Because I believe in the potential," he replied sincerely, "of the place and the people. And after 20 years making decisions based only on spreadsheets and projections, I want at least once to make a decision based on intuition and what I feel is right." Claire didn't answer immediately. She looked around at the cafe that had belonged to her mother and her grandmother before her. She thought about Laura, about her future, about the opportunities she could offer the girl if the business prospered. And then she looked again at Robert, this man who had appeared out of nowhere and who somehow seemed to belong there, as if he had always been part of that scene. "I need to think," she finally said. "It's a big decision." "Of course," Robert agreed. "Take all the time you need. The offer will still stand." In the following weeks, while Claire considered the proposal, routine at the cafe continued. Robert, however, became increasingly involved with the local community. He began attending merchant association meetings, met other business owners and artisans, and spoke with tourists to understand what they were looking for in the town. Without realizing it, he was building roots in a place where he had initially planned to spend only a few weeks. One afternoon, while helping Mrs. Elsie, an elderly lady who lived next door to the cafe, carry her groceries home, Robert spotted a luxury car parked in front of the Berry Blossom Cafe. A man of approximately 40 years old, wearing an expensive suit, but disproportionate to the casual atmosphere of the small town, was talking to Claire at the entrance. Even from a distance, Robert could perceive the tension in Claire's posture. He quickened his pace after saying goodbye to Mrs. Elsie, arriving at the cafe in time to hear the man say, in a condescending tone, "Be reasonable, Claire. You know you can't win this. I have the best lawyers, resources you can't even dream of, and I'm the biological father. Judges always favor blood ties." "You must be Mark Taylor," Robert interrupted, approaching with studied calm but firmness in his voice. "I've heard about you." The man turned, surprised by the interruption, assessing Robert with a quick glance that tried to categorize the newcomer. "And you are—" "Robert Oliver, Claire's partner in the cafe," he replied, extending his hand as he would in any business meeting. Noticing Claire's surprised look at hearing the word partner, Mark shook his hand reluctantly, his expression now cautious. "I didn't know the cafe had a partner." "It's recent," Robert said with a polite but cold smile, "and we have big plans for this place. Now, if you don't mind, we were about to start a meeting with our accountant. Financial matters, you understand." The mention of finances had a visible effect on Mark, who recoiled slightly. "Well, I just came to personally inform you about the upcoming hearing. My lawyers will be in touch." "Our lawyers will respond appropriately," Robert assured him, subtly placing himself between Claire and Mark, a protective presence that went unnoticed by neither of them. After a moment of tension, Mark nodded stiffly, got into his car and drove off. Only when the vehicle disappeared around the bend in the street did Claire let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Partner?" she asked, raising an eyebrow at Robert. "Sorry for the presumption," he replied, seeming genuinely apologetic. "I thought it would be useful at that specific moment." He seemed like the type who respects businessmen more than single mothers, which says a lot about his character, by the way. Claire observed him for a moment before a slow smile formed on her lips. "You weren't wrong. About him. And about the partnership. What do you mean?" "I accept your proposal," she declared, clear determination in her voice. "We'll become partners. We'll expand the cafe, turn it into an inn, do whatever it takes to ensure Laura stays where she belongs. With me." Robert couldn't suppress the smile that lit up his face. "You won't regret it, I promise." "I'm not worried about that," Claire said softly. "I think we've already proven to each other that we're trustworthy." And so what had begun as a temporary stay in a small town transformed into something much more significant. Robert not only found a new purpose, but also a new home, a new family, not bound by blood, but by something equally powerful: choice. The choice to stay, to invest, to protect, to belong. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Robert hired an architect to develop expansion plans for the cafe, transforming the upper floor into comfortable guest rooms. The menu was expanded, keeping traditional favorites but adding more sophisticated options to attract new customers. A website was created, highlighting not only the inn, but also the rich history of Claire's family and the authentic atmosphere that differentiated the place from the generic hotels that were starting to appear in town. Laura, observing all these changes with keen eyes, unexpectedly became an important part of the process. With her natural artistic sensibility, she offered surprisingly insightful suggestions about colors, arrangements, details that adults often overlooked. Robert insisted that her ideas be incorporated whenever possible, recognizing that the inn would, after all, be both her home and her future. It was during this period of transformation that Claire and Robert began to grow closer in a way that went beyond professional partnership. They were small moments, a gaze that lingered a little longer than necessary, fingers that touched when passing documents, late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours, revealing deeper layers of their stories and dreams. Robert told her about his failed marriage, about how he had prioritized his career over real relationships, about the emptiness he had felt even at the height of success. Claire spoke about the challenge of raising Laura alone, about moments of doubt and fear, about how the cafe, despite financial difficulties, had been her anchor in the toughest times. Neither of them directly mentioned the growing attraction between them, as if they feared that naming it might somehow break it. There was time. There was a cafe to renovate, a legal battle to face, a child to protect. Personal feelings could wait, or so they thought, until the night everything changed. It was a Friday, and the cafe had closed later than usual due to a group of tourists who had booked the space for a special dinner, a new service model that had been Robert's idea and had proven surprisingly profitable. Laura had already been put to bed, exhausted after helping serve desserts, a task she had insisted on taking, proud of her new official role in the family business. Claire and Robert finished cleaning the kitchen, the comfortable silence between them broken only by the soft sound of music coming from the old radio in the corner. It was an old song, one of those classic tunes that seemed to perfectly capture the sweet melancholy of love. "Will you dance?" Robert asked suddenly, extending his hand to Claire. She looked at him, surprised by the unexpected question, but with a playful glint in her eyes. "I thought you didn't know how to dance. Like a robot, if I recall Laura's assessment correctly." "I've been practicing," he admitted with a shy smile. "Laura has been a patient teacher. Besides, this music is slow enough even for a robot like me." With a soft laugh, Claire accepted his hand. There in the small kitchen with its time-worn ceramic floor, amidst freshly washed pots and the lingering aroma of coffee, they danced. It wasn't an elaborate or perfect dance, but it had its own beauty, the beauty of two adults who had faced their share of disappointments and losses, finding, against all odds, a moment of genuine connection. When the music ended, they remained close, still holding hands. There were questions in both their eyes, hesitations and hopes. Robert leaned in slightly, his intention clear. Claire did not pull back. The kiss that followed was soft, a question being asked and answered simultaneously. "This complicates things," Claire murmured when they pulled apart, though her smile contradicted any real concern in her words. "Life is complicated," Robert replied, touching her face gently, "but some complications are worth it." It was a moment of clarity for both, a recognition that regardless of how they had arrived there, this was where they wanted to be, together facing whatever came next. And what came next was the battle for Laura's custody. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a sunny spring Thursday. Robert, Claire, and Laura arrived early at the courthouse in Boston, accompanied by the attorney Robert had hired, Dr. Helen Foster, a middle-aged woman with keen eyes and a formidable reputation. Laura seemed small and vulnerable in her light blue dress, chosen especially for the occasion. Her large eyes moved nervously around the imposing court lobby, her hands clutching Claire's and Robert's. The latter had spent hours practicing in ASL how to explain to Laura, simply but honestly, what would happen that day. They didn't want her to feel confused or scared. When they spotted Mark arriving with his wife, an elegant blonde woman who seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation, and his lawyer, Robert felt Claire stiffen beside him. He put a protective arm around her shoulders, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by Mark, whose eyes narrowed slightly. "Remember," Dr. Foster murmured, "stay calm, no matter what he says. Let the documents and I do the talking for you." And documents there were plenty. In the preceding weeks, they had gathered an impressive arsenal. Statements from Laura's teachers about how well-adjusted and happy she was, reports from her therapists, highlighting consistent progress under Claire's care, community testimonies about the loving and stable environment Claire provided, financial documents showing the cafe's new stable situation, now officially an expanding inn. When the hearing began, Mark's lawyer attacked exactly as expected, questioning Claire's financial capacity, suggesting Laura would have more opportunities in Boston, implying that a child with special needs required resources only someone in Mark's position could provide. But Dr. Foster was prepared. With surgical precision, she deconstructed each argument, presenting counter-evidence highlighting Mark's initial abandonment and his complete absence during the first 7 years of Laura's life. When she mentioned that Mark had not even bothered to learn ASL, in contrast to Claire, Laura, and now Robert, who communicated fluently, a murmur ran through the room. "I am learning," Mark protested when questioned directly by the judge, a woman with a stern but fair expression. "I hired a private instructor." "How convenient," Dr. Foster commented with an education sharp as a blade, "just when you need to prove your commitment to the court." Mark's wife seemed increasingly uncomfortable as the hearing proceeded, especially when it was revealed that the sudden pursuit of custody suspiciously coincided with pressure from her father, the influential politician, for Mark to assume his family responsibilities before the upcoming elections. However, the most significant moment of the hearing came when the judge requested to speak with Laura privately, with only an official ASL interpreter from the court present. Claire squeezed Robert's hand as Laura was led out of the room, her eyes expressing the fear her words did not utter. "She'll be fine," Robert assured her. "Laura is smart and knows exactly what she wants. Trust her." The wait seemed endless. When Laura finally returned, her eyes immediately sought Claire and Robert, running to sit between them. The judge returned with a thoughtful expression, leafing through some notes before looking directly at the involved parties. "I will conduct a personal visit to the residences of both parties in the coming weeks," she announced. "I want to see for myself the environments in which Laura would live. Meanwhile, custody remains with Ms. Claire Meadows, and Mr. Taylor will have the right to supervised visits, if he so wishes. The final decision will be made after my full assessment." It wasn't a definitive victory, but it was a good sign. Mark looked disappointed, his lawyer visibly frustrated. Claire and Robert exchanged cautiously hopeful glances. As they left the courthouse, Robert noticed something curious. Mark's wife seemed to hesitate, as if she wanted to say something, before being hurried by her husband into his luxury car. There was something in her expression, guilt, regret, that remained etched in Robert's memory. "What happened in there with the judge?" Claire asked Laura on the way home, communicating in ASL. Laura smiled mysteriously and signed, "I just told the truth. That you are my real mom. That Robert helps us and learns to talk to me. and that the man in the suit never cared about me before. And I showed her my drawing. What drawing? Robert asked, curious. The one I made for the school contest, Laura explained. About family. Claire and Robert exchanged intrigued glances, but didn't press further. Laura seemed pleased with herself, and that, for now, was enough. Back in Willow Creek, they were greeted by a small crowd of friends and neighbors eager for news. Mrs. Elsie, Mr. Anthony the baker, Laura's teacher, and many others who had mobilized to support them. The community that Claire had known since childhood, and that Robert had, surprisingly, come to consider his own too, as they recounted the day's events, distributing the traditional cheese puffs they had brought from the trip. Robert watched Laura interacting animatedly with her school friends. She did not seem like a child traumatized by the court experience or fearful of the uncertain future. She seemed confident, secure, loved. And it was then that Robert fully understood something he perhaps already knew in his heart. This was his family now. Not by accident, not temporarily, but by choice. A choice he was willing to defend with everything he had. That night, after Laura had gone to sleep, Robert and Claire sat on the inn's newly built porch, watching the bright stars in Willow Creek's clear sky. Their intertwined hands rested in the space between them, a gesture that had become natural in recent days. "What are you thinking about?" Claire asked, noticing Robert's contemplative expression. "How unpredictable life is," he replied, his gaze still on the stars. "2 months ago I was an unhappy executive in New York, living a life that seemed impressive on paper, but empty in reality. Now I'm here in a small town I barely knew, co-owner of an inn, in love with an incredible woman and her extraordinary niece, and fighting for a family I didn't even know I wanted." Claire squeezed his hand, moved by the raw honesty in his words. "Are you scared of all this?" "Strangely, no," Robert admitted, finally looking at her. "I'm afraid of losing this, of losing you two. But I'm not afraid of this new path. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I should be. Even with all this legal mess, the uncertainty about Laura, the business still in transformation." "Even so," he confirmed with a tranquil smile. "Perhaps that's what it means to find your place in the world, when the challenges, no matter how difficult, seem worth facing." Claire leaned in and kissed him softly. "Welcome to your place in the world." Then, as the kiss deepened, both knew that, regardless of what the judge decided, regardless of the obstacles they would still face, they had found something rare and precious. A true home not defined by walls or legal documents, but by hearts that had chosen each other. And in the next room, Laura slept peacefully, dreaming of her family, the aunt who was like a mother, and the man who had unexpectedly entered their lives, learning her language, respecting her silence, becoming part of her wordless world. 2 weeks passed since the preliminary hearing. The Berry Blossom Cafe Inn, as it was now officially called, was in full transformation. The ground floor maintained the cozy essence of the original cafe, but now featured an expanded menu and more refined decor, while still preserving the rustic charm that characterized it. The upper floor, previously occupied only by Robert's apartment, was undergoing renovations to accommodate 4 comfortable guest suites. Robert had temporarily moved into a small room in the back, near Claire's and Laura's quarters. The proximity had further accelerated the intimacy between them, transforming what began as a business partnership into something much deeper and more significant. It was not uncommon to see them sharing discreet kisses while working, or holding hands during walks around town. The community watched this evolution with warm approval. The cafe owner and the newcomer from New York had become Willow Creek's new favorite couple. Laura, in turn, blossomed with the changes. The initial insecurity about Robert's presence had given way to frank adoration. She followed him around the inn, eager to learn about the renovations, fascinated by the architectural drawings, proud to be included in the decisions. At night, she insisted that Robert tell her stories in ASL, laughing at his occasional signing errors and correcting him with the characteristic patience of a natural teacher. It was during one of these family moments, with Laura finally asleep after a particularly long story about a princess who danced to save her kingdom, that Claire and Robert discussed the next important step. The judge confirmed the visit for Friday, Claire commented, adjusting the covers over Laura before following Robert out of the room. "She'll come at 2 in the afternoon. She wants to see what our normal routine is like." "We're ready," Robert assured her, putting his arm around her shoulders as they walked to the small living room. "The inn is taking shape. Laura is happy. We have community support. There's nothing to worry about." "Still, I can't help but feel anxious," Claire admitted, sitting on the sofa with a sigh. "Mark has resources, political influence through his father-in-law. If he really wants to, he can make this very difficult for us." Robert sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "Claire, I need to tell you something. I've avoided mentioning it because I wanted to be sure, but I think I can now." She looked at him with curiosity, a slight concern crossing her face. "What is it?" "Remember Mark's wife? How uncomfortable she seemed throughout the hearing." Claire nodded slowly. "Yes, she barely looked at us. She seemed ashamed, perhaps." "Exactly," Robert agreed. "There was something in her expression that intrigued me, so I did some discreet investigating. I contacted some old colleagues who know the political circles her father moves in." "And you found out something?" "Teresa, that's her name, isn't happy with this whole situation. Apparently, the decision to seek custody of Laura came primarily from her father, who is planning to run for Senate next year and wants to present Mark as an exemplary family man. The narrative of the successful businessman who redeemed himself and took responsibility for his special needs daughter would be perfect for the campaign. They're using Laura as a political strategy." Claire's voice trembled with indignation. That's despicable," Robert completed, squeezing her hands in solidarity. "But there's more. Teresa and Mark are having serious marital problems. He's been, shall we say, less than faithful. She's considering divorce, but her father is pressuring her to maintain appearances until the election." "How did you find all this out?" A small smile appeared on Robert's lips. 20 years in the corporate world taught me how to get information. A few calls to the right people, a few discreet questions. And to be completely honest, a bit of luck. Mark's father-in-law's personal assistant is a cousin of an old colleague of mine." Claire absorbed the information, her gaze distant as she processed the implications. "So this custody battle is all a farce? A political strategy?" "It seems so," Robert confirmed. "And I believe we can use this to our advantage. Not aggressively or manipulatively," he added quickly, seeing Claire's worried expression. "But perhaps we can make Teresa realize that she's being used just as much as Laura in this scheme. If she decides to speak out, it would be powerful," Claire concluded, understanding the strategy. "Say wife saying her husband is seeking custody only due to political pressure, not genuine love for a daughter he never knew." "Exactly. I'm working on it discreetly. In the meantime, let's focus on impressing the judge on Friday. Show her the loving home we've built for Laura here." Claire leaned in and kissed him softly. "You're extraordinary, you know. I never imagined that stiff executive who showed up at my door a few months ago would become the pillar of my life." "Nor did I imagine I'd find a family in a town I barely knew," he replied, caressing her face tenderly. "Sometimes we lose something to find what truly matters." That night, embraced in the modest bed they now shared, Robert reflected on how much his life had changed. The luxury apartment in New York, the dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, the meetings with CEOs and investors, all that seemed to belong to another life, lived by another person. Here, in a small town in Vermont, in a simple bed, beside a woman he had met only a few months ago, he had found a peace and purpose that all his corporate success had never provided. Friday arrived quickly, bringing with it a clear sky and radiant sun that seemed like a good omen. From early morning, the Berry Blossom Cafe Inn bustled with controlled activity. They didn't want it to look staged. The judge would certainly notice, but everyone was naturally eager for everything to go well. At precisely 2 o'clock, an official car parked in front of the inn. Dr. Marina Reynolds, the judge presiding over the case, was a woman of medium height, carefully styled grey hair, and lively eyes that seemed to notice every detail. She wore a sober but elegant suit and carried a discreet briefcase. Claire and Robert greeted her at the entrance, both nervous but determined to appear natural. Laura, who had returned early from school especially for the occasion, stood beside them, wearing her school uniform and a shy smile. "Welcome to the Berry Blossom Cafe Inn." "Dr. Reynolds," Claire greeted, extending her hand. We appreciate you coming personally to see our home. It is my duty to know the environment in which a child lives or may come to live, the judge replied with professional cordiality, shaking Claire's hand and then Robert's. Then, she knelt slightly to be at Laura's eye level and, to everyone's surprise, signed in ASL, "Hello. Laura, do you remember me?" Laura smiled broadly, visibly impressed, and responded with animated signs. "Yes. You're the judge who talked to me in court. I didn't know you spoke my language." "I'm learning." The judge signed with movement still a little hesitant but clear enough. "I thought it was important to be able to talk directly with you." The judge's gesture of learning ASL specifically for this case did not go unnoticed by Claire and Robert, who exchanged hopeful glances. It was a sign of commitment and respect that spoke volumes about her character. The visit began with a tour of the inn. They showed the cafe on the ground floor, explaining the recent modifications and future plans. The judge observed everything carefully, asking occasional questions about the business operation, everyone's involvement, the current financial stability. Robert perceived that behind the seemingly casual questions, she was methodically evaluating the solidity of the environment they offered Laura. When they went upstairs to see the residential area, Laura took on the role of guide, proud to show her room decorated with dancing mobiles and colorful drawings on the walls. The judge noticed a framed photograph on the bedside table, Claire, Sophia, and baby Laura. "My mother," Laura explained in signs when she noticed the judge looking at the photograph. "Aunt Claire says she loved me very much, and that she's watching over me from somewhere special." The judge nodded with a gentle smile, making a discreet note in her notebook. The most revealing part of the visit, however, came during a seemingly casual conversation in the kitchen, while Claire prepared coffee for everyone. The judge observed how Laura naturally helped, fetching cups and arranging cookies on a plate without being asked, moving through the space with the familiarity of someone who is truly at home. "Laura," the judge called in ASL, "can you show me your drawing again?" "The one you showed me in court." The girl nodded enthusiastically and ran to her room, returning moments later with a colorful sheet of paper that she proudly handed to the judge. Claire and Robert, who had never seen this mysterious drawing, discreetly leaned in to look. It was a simple but touching illustration, typical of a 7-year-old. It showed 3 figures holding hands under a radiant sun, a dark-haired woman, clearly Claire, a tall man in a suit, Robert, and between them, a small girl with what looked like a hearing aid, Laura. Above, in colorful childlike letters, was written, "My family." "This is a very beautiful drawing," the judge commented, both verbally and in signs. "You made it for the school contest, right?" Laura nodded. "The theme was my family. I won first prize." "Deservedly," the judge smiled, carefully returning the drawing. Then, addressing Claire and Robert, she added, "Laura's teacher sent me a copy of this drawing, along with a letter explaining how well-adjusted and happy she is at school. It was one of the reasons I wanted to make this visit personally." The conversation continued for some time, with the judge asking questions about Laura's daily routine, her extracurricular activities, her progress at school and in therapies. As the visit drew to a close, she asked to speak briefly alone with Laura in the garden, while Claire and Robert waited anxiously on the porch. "What do you think?" Claire asked in a low voice, watching Laura and the judge walk slowly among the berry blossom trees. "I think it's going well," Robert replied, though his own anxiety was evident in the way he drummed his fingers on the porch railing. "She seems fair and attentive, and the fact that she learned ASL specifically for this case says a lot. Still, Mark has resources and influence, and we have love and truth on our side," Robert completed, holding her hand firmly, "and that matters to anyone who is truly looking." When the judge and Laura returned, the girl seemed relaxed and content, immediately running to show Robert a small flower she had picked. The judge observed the interaction with a thoughtful gaze before saying goodbye. "I appreciate your availability and transparency," she said formally, though her tone was warmer than at the beginning of the visit. "I will visit Mr. Taylor's residence next week and subsequently make my decision. You will be notified by the court." As they escorted the judge to her car, Robert felt a small hand slip into his. Laura looked at him with her large expressive eyes, a small confident smile on her lips. And in that moment, despite the uncertainty that still hung over them, Robert knew with absolute certainty that he would do anything to protect that family he had found by chance, but chosen with all his heart. The days following the judge's visit were filled with nervous anticipation, but also intense activity. Renovations at the inn continued at full speed, and the first official guests were scheduled to arrive within 2 weeks. Robert and Claire channeled their anxiety into work, supervising the installation of new furniture, finalizing the inn's website, training the 2 newly hired employees, a young man to help in the cafe, and a woman to take care of cleaning the rooms. Laura, oblivious to the adults' worries, was more excited than ever. The approaching official opening of the inn filled her with enthusiasm, especially since Claire had agreed that she could perform a small welcome dance for the first guests. She spent hours practicing in the back room, creating a choreography that, she said, would tell the story of the berry blossom trees. It was on one of those rehearsal afternoons, with Laura focused on her dance and Claire busy with suppliers, that Robert received an unexpected call. Recognizing the number as that of his contact in Boston, he answered quickly and moved to the backyard to talk in private. "Teresa Taylor wants to meet us," he announced to Claire later, when they finally had a moment alone. In private, without Mark's or her father's knowledge. Mark's wife? Claire seemed surprised and cautious. "Why? How did you manage that?" "Remember what I told you about her being unhappy with the situation? Apparently things have worsened since the hearing. Mark has been difficult, and her father has intensified pressure on the couple as the campaign approaches. She has reached her limit." "What does she want?" "I'm not sure," Robert admitted. But she was quite clear on one point. She doesn't want Laura to be used as a political campaign piece. She suggested a neutral meeting at a cafe in Burlington. "Tomorrow afternoon." Claire considered the proposal, biting her lip in a gesture Robert now recognized as typical when she weighed difficult decisions. "It sounds risky," she finally said. "What if it's a trap? Something to make us look manipulative in the judge's eyes?" "I thought of that," Robert agreed. "That's why I suggested our attorney, Dr. Foster, be present, not as an active participant in the conversation, but as a legal witness," Teresa agreed. With this arrangement, Claire felt more secure to proceed. The next afternoon, they left Laura in Mrs. Elsie's care and drove to Burlington, the larger neighboring city, where Teresa awaited them at a discreet table at the back of a traditional cafe. Dr. Foster was already present, sitting at a nearby table, far enough to allow privacy, but close enough to hear the conversation. Teresa Taylor was an elegant woman, approximately 35 years old, with delicate features and an air of contained fragility. Her eyes, however, revealed a determination that surprised Claire. After the initial introductions, she went straight to the point. "I want you to know that I never supported this custody bid," she began, her voice low but firm. "Mark never showed the slightest interest in Laura until my father mentioned how it could benefit his political image. Suddenly, he became obsessed with the idea of being a present father. Why are you telling us this now?" Claire asked, without hostility, just genuine curiosity. Teresa took a deep breath, nervously twisting her wedding ring on her finger. "Because I've finally made a decision. I'm leaving Mark. I've already consulted an attorney and will begin divorce proceedings next week. But before that, I want to do what's right for Laura." "And what do you believe is right for her?" Robert gently inquired. "That she stays with you, obviously," Teresa replied with a look that suggested the answer was self-evident. "I saw how Mark referred to her when we were alone, as a problem, a complication. He doesn't even know how to communicate with her. And after the judge's visit to our house yesterday—" "How was the visit?" Claire couldn't help but ask. A bitter smile crossed Teresa's face. "It was revealing. Mark tried to impress the judge with all the things he could buy for Laura. A very expensive private school, therapies with the best specialists, even a room he specially decorated for the occasion, full of toys no child ever touched. But when the judge asked directly how he planned to communicate with his daughter, it was evident that his ASL lessons hadn't progressed much beyond hello and how are you." Claire and Robert exchanged glances, absorbing the information. "What do you intend to do?" Robert finally asked. "I've written a sworn statement," Teresa replied, taking an envelope from her purse and placing it on the table, detailing Mark's true motives for seeking custody and his complete lack of genuine interest in Laura. "I delivered a copy to the judge this morning, and this one is for you. I've also made myself available to testify formally if necessary." "Why are you doing this?" Claire asked, genuinely touched by the courage of that woman. Teresa's eyes filled with unshed tears. "Because I also lost my mother when I was a child. I know how important it is to have someone who truly cares, and because I'm tired of lies and appearances. I've lived too long in a charade." Before they could respond, Teresa stood up, grabbing her purse. "I need to go before anyone notices my absence. But I want you to know what you are doing for Laura is extraordinary. The way you've created a home for her, how you've learned her language, how you've included her in your lives. That's what a family should be, not a political arrangement." With those words, she said goodbye and left quickly, leaving Claire and Robert deeply moved by the sincerity and courage of that woman they barely knew. Dr. Foster approached the table, equally impressed by what she had witnessed. "This changes everything," she commented, examining the sworn statement. "With this document and her willingness to testify, Mark's chances of obtaining custody are practically nil." The drive back to Willow Creek was silent, both absorbed in thoughts about the surprising turn of events. Robert drove with one hand on the wheel and the other firmly holding Claire's, as if that physical contact were an anchor in the emotional storm they faced. "She risked a lot," Claire finally commented, breaking the silence. "Facing her husband, her father, all that power structure." "Some people find courage in the most unexpected moments," Robert replied, gently squeezing her hand, "especially when they realize they're fighting for something that truly matters." Upon arriving home, they found Laura and Mrs. Elsie in the kitchen, preparing cheese biscuits. The sight of the girl with her face partially covered in flour, silently laughing as she shaped the dough, was like balm to their tense spirits. This was the world they were fighting to preserve, a place of security, simple joy, genuine love. That night, after Laura fell asleep, Claire told Robert about the conversation with Mark, about his apparent transformation, about the possibility of allowing him to meet Laura under controlled conditions. "What do you think?" she asked, genuinely valuing the opinion of the man who had become her partner in all aspects of life. Robert reflected for a moment, carefully weighing the situation. "I think people can change when they face real consequences for their actions," he finally said. "And I think Laura has the right to know her origins if she wishes. But the final decision must be hers without pressure." "Exactly what I thought," Claire agreed, cuddling closer to him on the sofa. "We'll talk to her tomorrow, explain the situation in terms she can understand, and respect her decision, whatever it may be." The next morning, sitting in the garden under the generous shade of a berry blossom tree, they carefully explained to Laura in ASL about Mark's visit and his expression of interest in meeting her. They were honest but gentle, emphasizing that the choice was entirely hers and that, whatever she decided, nothing would change in their family. Laura listened intently, her expressive eyes moving between Claire and Robert as she absorbed each signed word. When they finished, she remained silent for a few moments, a thoughtful expression on her small face that made her seem much older than her 8 years. "Does he know how to talk to me?" she finally asked in ASL, a simple but deeply significant question. "He said he's learning," Claire replied honestly. "But he doesn't know much yet." Laura nodded, processing the information. "Can I think about it?" "Of course you can," Robert assured her, his signs fluent after months of daily practice. "There's no rush, and whatever your decision, we will support it." The girl smiled, seemingly satisfied with the answer, and soon became distracted with Biscuit, who was chasing a butterfly among the garden flowers. For her, the world continued to spin with the simplicity of childhood, anchored in the security of the constant love that surrounded her. The weeks that followed were filled with intense preparations for the wedding, which was fast approaching. Claire, never very interested in formalities and traditions, surprised herself with her own enthusiasm in choosing flowers, planning the menu, selecting music. Laura involved herself in every detail, especially in the choreography she was secretly preparing as a gift for the couple. It was during this period of happy agitation that Laura finally communicated her decision about Mark. "I want to meet him," she signed one evening during dinner, surprising Claire and Robert with the sudden declaration. "But I want both of you to be with me. And I want it to be here in our home." They agreed, of course, respecting her courage and her prudence. A meeting was scheduled for the following Sunday, an informal lunch in the inn's garden with the reassuring presence of Biscuit, whom Laura insisted should be present because he knows who is good and who isn't. The meeting was initially tense and uncomfortable, as might be expected. Mark arrived punctually, bringing a modest gift for Laura, a set of high-quality colored pencils after Claire had guided him on the girl's love for drawing. He was visibly nervous, his eyes revealing a mixture of anxiety and hope when Laura finally came down to the garden, holding Claire's and Robert's hands firmly. To everyone's surprise, it was Biscuit who broke the ice. The dog, normally wary of strangers, cautiously approached Mark, sniffed his hand, and after a moment of canine evaluation, allowed himself to be petted. Laura, observing the interaction, seemed to relax slightly. "Hi," she signed simply, her large eyes fixed on Mark with the frank curiosity of childhood. Mark, visibly moved, responded with slow and clearly rehearsed signs. "Hello? Laura, happy to meet you." The conversation that followed was awkward but genuine. Mark had clearly made an effort to learn some basic signs, and when his limitation became evident, Claire or Robert gently translated. Laura, initially reserved, gradually began to open up, showing some of her drawings, talking about her dance classes, formally introducing Biscuit. At the end of lunch, as Mark was leaving, Laura surprised everyone with a direct question, her hands forming the signs with the precision that came from daily practice. "Why didn't you want to meet me before?" The silence that followed was dense, laden with untold stories, regrets, and difficult truths. Claire and Robert exchanged apprehensive glances, unsure how Mark would respond to such a direct and potentially painful question. To Mark's credit, he did not try to evade. With Claire's help to translate, he replied with an honesty that seemed to cost him considerable effort. "I was a different person then. Selfish, scared. I didn't know how to be a good father. I made many mistakes, and the biggest one was not being present in your life. I am deeply sorry for that. I know words don't change the past, but I hope that one day you can forgive me." Laura watched him for a long moment, her expressive eyes unreadable. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she approached and offered him a small drawing she had made during lunch. It showed 4 figures under a tree: Claire, Robert, Laura, and a man who clearly represented Mark, slightly set apart but still part of the scene. "This is you," she signed, pointing to the figure. "Not as my dad, I already have one," she added, casting an affectionate glance at Robert. "But maybe as a friend someday." The words, in their childlike simplicity, carried a wisdom and generosity that moved everyone present. Mark accepted the drawing with trembling hands, unable to hide the emotion that overwhelmed him. "Thank you," he managed to say, both verbally and in the sign he had learned. "It means a lot to me." That first meeting paved the way for others, each a little less uncomfortable than the last. Mark continued learning ASL, demonstrating a commitment that positively surprised Claire and Robert. There were no attempts to assume a parental role or interfere with the established family dynamic, just a genuine effort to build some kind of positive relationship with the biological daughter he had almost completely lost due to his own choices. While this unexpected reconciliation developed at its own cautious pace, life continued its course. The big wedding day was fast approaching, bringing with it the sweet excitement of the final preparations. The ceremony would be held in the inn's garden, under the berry blossom trees that had silently witnessed the unfolding of that extraordinary story. On the morning of the wedding, Willow Creek dawned under an impeccably blue sky, as if nature itself blessed the union. Laura woke early, too excited to sleep, and insisted on helping with all the preparations, from checking the flowers to supervising the setting of the reception tables. Claire, traditionally practical and not much inclined to frivolities, surprised herself with the emotion she felt as she put on the simple but elegant wedding dress she had chosen, an ivory-toned model that complemented her natural beauty without exaggeration. Mrs. Elsie, self-appointed matron of honor, helped her with her hair, intertwining small white flowers among her brown curls. "I've never seen you so radiant, child," the old lady commented, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. "Sophia would be so proud to see you like this. So happy." The mention of her sister brought a moment of bittersweet nostalgia for Claire. "Sometimes I feel like she somehow orchestrated all this," she confessed softly, As if she sent Robert to us, knowing exactly what we needed. Meanwhile, in the small room he temporarily occupied in the back, Robert adjusted his tie with slightly trembling hands. It was strange to feel nervous. He who had conducted meetings with multinational CEOs without his pulse even quickening. But this was not a commercial contract or a corporate merger. It was the formalization of a life choice, a commitment that transcended roles and signatures. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Laura, already dressed in her beautiful light blue bridesmaid dress, a tiny flower arrangement adorning her elaborate braids. "Are you nervous?" She signed with a mischievous smile, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "A little," he admitted in ASL, smiling back. "It's normal, I guess." "You don't need to be," she replied with the absolute confidence of childhood. "You're already a family. Today is just a party to celebrate." The simple wisdom of her words instantly calmed Robert's nerves. She was right, of course. The true union, the true family, had already formed in the small daily interactions, in the shared challenges, in the love that had grown naturally between them. The ceremony was everything one could wish for, intimate, moving, deeply meaningful. Friends and neighbors who had become extended family filled the garden, decorated with elegant simplicity. The justice of the peace, an elderly gentleman with a grave voice and kind eyes, conducted the ceremony with a perfect blend of solemnity and human warmth. An ASL interpreter translated every word, ensuring Laura didn't miss a single moment. When it was time for the vows, Robert looked deeply into Claire's eyes and found there everything he needed to know about choices, second chances and new beginnings. "Claire," he began, his voice firm despite the emotion, "when I came to Willow Creek, I was running away. From an empty life, from expectations that didn't belong to me, from a version of myself that had lost its way. I didn't know what I was looking for until I found you and Laura. You taught me the true meaning of family. Not the one we're born into, but the one we choose to build every day with love, respect, and joy. I promise to build this family with you for all the days of my life. I promise to be the partner you deserve, the father Laura deserves, the man you both helped me become." Claire's eyes shone with unshed tears as she replied, "Robert, after Sophia passed, I believed Laura and I would be alone on this journey. I built walls around our small world, determined to be strong enough for both of us. Then you appeared, with your lonely suitcase and your lost eyes, and somehow I knew immediately that you belonged here. Not because we needed someone to complete us, but because together we are more than we could be apart. I promise to share this journey with you, the challenges and the joys, the discoveries and the new beginnings. I promise we will never forget what truly matters, even when the world outside tries to convince us otherwise." When the rings were exchanged, simple gold bands with each other's initials engraved inside, Laura surprised everyone by presenting a small, carved wooden box that no one had seen before. Inside there was a third, smaller ring, which she solemnly placed on her own finger. "Now we are officially connected," she signed with a radiant smile. "Family forever." The gesture, unplanned and completely spontaneous, brought tears to even the most restrained guests. The justice of the peace, visibly moved, officially declared them a family, and the applause that followed seemed to echo far beyond the garden, perhaps even reaching the stars where, Claire liked to think. Sophia smiled approvingly. The party that followed was an authentic celebration of the community they had built. Live music, delicious food prepared by Mr. Anthony and other friends of Claire's, children running between tables, elders telling stories of old times. There were no excessive formalities or rigid protocols, just the genuine joy of people who chose to celebrate together. The most moving moment of the reception came when Laura presented her surprise, a dance she had secretly rehearsed for weeks. Alone in the center of the garden, she moved with surprising grace for someone so young, telling through her body the story of her family, the challenges, the losses, the encounters, the joys. Even without being able to hear the music that accompanied her, every movement was perfectly synchronized, guided by the rhythm she felt within herself. When she finished, the silence that followed was charged with emotion, broken only by the enthusiastic applause that soon emerged from everyone present. Claire and Robert were the first to embrace her, the three united in a hug that spoke more than words ever could express. As the night advanced, the party gradually transformed into a more intimate gathering. The last guest said goodbye with warm hugs, promising to return the next day to help with the cleanup, another Vermont tradition Robert had learned to appreciate. Laura, exhausted but deeply happy, fell asleep in Mrs. Elsie's lap, who gently offered to take her to bed. Finally alone in the garden, lit by paper lanterns and the soft glow of the stars, Claire and Robert sat on one of the benches under the oldest berry blossom tree, a moment of peace after the joyful hustle and bustle of the day. "Happy?" Claire asked, her face illuminated by the soft moonlight, more beautiful than Robert had ever seen her. "More than I ever imagined possible," he replied sincerely, taking her hand in his. "Did you know that today marks exactly 1 year since I arrived in Willow Creek?" "Seriously?" Claire seemed surprised. "Time has passed so quickly, and at the same time it feels like you've always been here." "In a way, I guess I always was," he reflected, looking at the stars that dotted Vermont's clear sky. "I just didn't know where here was until I found you and Laura." They sat in silence for a few moments, absorbing the stillness of the night, the sweet aroma of the garden flowers, the distant sound of the small town falling asleep. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. "Do you know what impresses me most?" Claire commented after a while. "How life can change completely in such a short time. A year ago, I was worried if I could keep the cafe running, if I could provide Laura with everything she needed. You were trapped in a life that seemed perfect on paper, but didn't fulfill you. And now here we are." "Life is made of choices," Robert replied, gently squeezing her hand. "Some big and dramatic, others small and seemingly insignificant. But together they bring us exactly where we need to be." "And where we need to be is here," Claire completed, resting her head on his shoulder. "In Willow Creek, under these berry blossom trees, with our daughter sleeping peacefully under our roof. This is our story now. A story that is just beginning," Robert smiled, leaning in to kiss her softly under Vermont's starry sky. And so, as the night embraced Willow Creek with its dark, star-studded cloak, the Berry Blossom Cafe Inn rested peacefully, harboring within its walls not just guests and furniture, but dreams, new beginnings, and a family that had found each other in the most unexpected way, through dance steps in the silence of the night, heartbeats synchronized without words, and the silent certainty of finally being home. Dear listeners, we hope that Robert, Claire, and Laura's journey has touched your hearts as much as it has touched ours. It is a story that reminds us how the most unexpected encounters can completely transform our lives, and how family goes far beyond blood ties. It is built daily through choices, commitment, and true love. If this narrative moved you, be sure to subscribe to our channel to receive more stories that explore the complexities and beauties of human relationships. Activate the bell to be notified whenever we publish new content. Your likes and comments are essential for us to continue bringing stories that inspire and move. Tell us in the comments section, which city are you watching from, and what moment in the story touched your heart the most? Was it when Robert decided to stay in Willow Creek? The moment Laura danced with him for the first time? Or perhaps the emotional ending where the family finally became official? Remember, just like on the berry blossom trees, life's sweetest fruits often grow on the most unexpected branches. Until the next story.